Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got a video that's going to answer probably one of the most frequently asked questions that we get here at the museum. These are questions that people have been asking me since day one that I haven't had a solid answer for. And to be fair, today's video is not going to be a complete answer either, but we're getting closer to the truth here. Know that just because you asked me something back in 2018 and I didn't have an answer for you then, does not mean I have not been looking during this time. It's just a matter of finding that original historic document. So the question that we probably get asked most frequently and don't have an answer for is, what was the exact loadout of shells that Battleship New Jersey carried? A part of why this answer is difficult is because it almost certainly would have changed over time, and we'll be able to show that somewhat in our video today. The shells that they carried when she was first commissioned in World War II would have been different from the amounts that they carried in the 1980s. However, the same basic three types are used on board throughout. Now, during the later commissionings, there were a handful of other types which would have been carried in relatively small quantities, and hopefully we'll find paperwork about them in the future that gives us numbers. But realistically, you're going to see three types of shells. You're going to see blue ones like this, blind loaded and plugged. You're going to see green ones like this, the high capacity rounds, and you'll see black ones. Those are our armor piercing rounds. The green is an olive drab color. So many of you guys say in the comment section that it looks gray. Go and visit a battleship. Trust me, this is green. So, how many of each of these colored shells was the battleship designed to carry? We'll answer that question in a second, but first, here's a word from the sponsor of today's video. In today's video, we're talking about what the guns got to eat. And honestly, there wasn't a whole lot of variety for that. Not so with what us humans can eat, and thanks to Magic Spoon, we've got even more variety now than ever before. In addition to the many types of cereal that they've had for the longest time, or the protein bars that have come out more recently, they're now adding granola to their repertoire. Remember, Magic Spoon fits a variety of diets, it's high protein, no sugar, and great for carb-conscious lifestyles. Magic Spoon's treats are crispy, crunchy, and airy without the chewy stickiness of a protein bar. The ideal protein on the go. And their brand new high-protein granola keeps the Magic Spoon promise. Remember that viewers of this channel have a special discount code, Battleship, to get $5 off online orders. There's a link down in the description you can click on to get that, or you can find Magic Spoon on Amazon and at your local grocery store. So, answering the question of how many of each type of shell Battleship New Jersey carried is kind of difficult because it changes over time. But we've got a pretty good idea of what she was designed to carry now. And again, this is thanks to research that's been done on some of the other museum battleships. My friend Justin at Battleship Cove found the documents that talked about all of the types of armament loaded to that ship. You'll remember last week, maybe 2 weeks ago now, we did a video on the small arms that we believe the ship would have carried in World War II. That same set of documents talked about which shells South Dakota class battleships were designed to be armed with. And again, Justin sent that information down to Battleship Alabama, another South Dakota class battleship, and our friend Matt down at Battleship Alabama is the one who sent that information to us. And so we can assume with reasonable accuracy that the battleships completed in 1942 were designed for about the same number of shells as the battleships completed in 1943. We have even better reasonable suspicion of this because the South Dakota class battleships had roughly the same size barbette. Their guns may be 5 calibers shorter than ours, but they're firing the exact same projectiles, and much of the equipment, the hoists and the machinery here on the shell decks are going to be the same. They're firing the exact same types of shells, just out slightly different guns. The barbettes are roughly the same size, and so they carry And so they're designed to carry the same number of shells, which is roughly 130 per barrel, or about 1,200 total rounds of ammunition. That's exactly what the Iowa class is designed for too. So again, their numbers are likely going to be the same as ours. So, as designed, these ships were supposed to carry 27 blind loaded and plugged shells. Those are shells like these that are painted blue. They are a real shell in every other respect. You can fire them. They just don't have a burster charge inside. They're filled with sand instead, so they will not detonate. They're good for target practice. So you're carrying 27 of them, or enough for 3 full salvos. They would carry 176 of these green high-capacity shells, which is enough for nearly 20 full salvos. It's about 19 and a half salvos. Keep in mind that you're not going to be firing full salvos. One, if you're trying to fire full salvos, more than 50% of the time you're going to have some sort of equipment casualty, like a hoist failure or something like that, that prevents the gun crew in one of the barrels from getting the gun loaded as quickly as the others. So realistically, you've got about 20 full salvos out of this. But with the high capacity rounds, you likely aren't firing full salvos in the first place. You're likely using those for shore bombardment, which means dropping 1 or 2 rounds on a target and then being told to correct and then walking the round into the target. So on shore bombardment duty, you're not firing full salvos to the same extent, which is one of the reasons why originally these ships would have carried 997 of the black armor-piercing shells. So the armor-piercing ones are what you use against other battleships in a surface engagement. They're the ones that have the time delay fuse to penetrate enemy ships' armor. So that is 100, it's just under 111 full salvos. So we're carrying 83% armor-piercing, 15% high capacity, and just 2% training rounds. For armor piercing, you're likely firing against an enemy ship that is moving, pitching, and rolling, which means that you're likely firing full salvos at the target to put as many shells out there to get an idea of, are you bracketing the target, are you on target, are you completely missing? And so it makes sense that you would be carrying more of those than of the other type. In this case, we're carrying about 6 times as many armor-piercing salvos as high capacity, even though we'd be firing about 9 times as many armor-piercing in a salvo as high capacity in a salvo. But this really shows you that the battleships were designed for surface engagements. And that might have been true during World War II for the fast battleships, but the older, slow battleships were being used primarily as Robert Lundgren calls them, siege engines. You were using them for shore bombardment. You would ring an enemy island in our older, slow battleships, and you would just bombard it. Or it doesn't have to be an enemy island, like D-Day. We've got a bunch of battleships off the coast there. And then you just bombard it like that. So for the battleships that are intended to be used primarily as shore bombardment assets, we've been able to extrapolate how much ammunition of each type the battleship West Virginia would have carried. In 1944, at the Battle of Suragawa Strait, West Virginia gets into arguably her most famous battle, after maybe Pearl Harbor. Certainly her most famous battle where she's firing her 16-inch guns. Older battleships like that typically didn't carry as much ammunition. West Virginia only carried 90 rounds per barrel compared to the 130 rounds per barrel of an American fast battleship. That brings her up to a total of about 720 rounds on board. She had 4 twin turrets. During the Battle of Suragawa Strait, she carried 199 armor-piercing shells at the beginning of the battle. And during the engagement, she fires 89 of them, meaning that she has 110 left. Knowing how many she was capable of carrying, we can then subtract that 200, and we get that she was carrying about 520 high-capacity rounds for shore bombardment. By the battle, she would have almost certainly expended some of these during the invasions on Leyte Gulf, but that seems to be her typical loadout. She would have had about 72% high capacity and about 28% armor piercing. Those numbers might be off. She would have probably had a couple of BLMP, but if it's anything like New Jersey, where we only carried 27 or 2%, then those numbers aren't going to be too far off. So it gives you an idea, 3/4 high capacity for shore bombardment versus 1/4 armor piercing, in the off chance that, say, Admiral Nishimura tries to sail his battleships through a strait that you have to guard. It's also interesting to see here that after the battle, Oldendorf and Kincaid talk about how their battleships have shot through so much of their shells. West Virginia, the one that fired the most, hadn't even shot through half of her armor-piercing shells yet. So she still had 110 rounds, which is roughly 14 full salvos on board the ship. So obviously not ideal if you're going to go into a surface action with, say, the Japanese Northern Force, but she was far from toothless and unarmed. So that's the research we've accomplished so far. You'd be carrying approximately 85% armor piercing and approximately 15% high capacity if you were expected to go into surface action. And you would be carrying approximately 75% high capacity and 25% armor piercing if you were expected to be used for shore bombardment. During World War II, we're still looking for documentation on later wars. In looking at Battleship New Jersey's Vietnam Commission, she fired a couple of BLMP rounds like this in training, but almost exclusively high capacity rounds, but almost entirely high capacity rounds during shore bombardment. So much so that when they're listing 5-inch ammunition in the logbook, they have close to a dozen different types of projectile named to show how much they're using. But when they're firing 16-inch ammunition, it just says 16-inch powder, 16-inch projectile, as if it's so uncommon to put an AP projectile into the gun that they're not even logging. That doesn't tell us how many of each type they would have carried, but it's pretty likely, given the amount that they're firing during that war, that they're carrying almost exclusively high capacity rounds. Hopefully in a future video we'll find more information and we'll be able to tell you exactly what she would have carried during that Vietnam Commission when she was expected to be used for shore bombardment. And hopefully we'll be able to get some further research off as well that will tell us what she would have carried in the 80s when they are training to fight ships like Kirov-class battle cruisers, but also to be used as shore bombardment assets. So I know this is only partially answering the question, but at least we're starting to get there. Supporting the museum financially helps us find the time to do these research projects that are going to answer the questions that you guys have and have had for a really long time, it turns out. So Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals. We really appreciate the support from Magic Spoon on today's video. And remember to check out the link in the description below and use the discount code BATTLESHIP for $5 off your next online order. There's also a link down there to donate if you'd like to support the museum and our future researches. What are some other long-standing questions that you guys have had that we haven't had the chance to answer yet? Let us know in the comment section down below. Do you think our loadout of roughly 6 armor-piercing rounds for every high-capacity round makes sense? Do you think having 4 high-capacity rounds for every armor-piercing round for shore bombardment makes sense? Let us know in the comment section down below. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.